The Mutilators. This is a book by Mervin Casey, The Mutilators. Paperback book, fairly short. This was originally written in 1976. This is a fictional telling of a story of cattle mutilation, and this obviously came out in the early days of the cattle mutilation phenomenon that was occurring across the Southwest, especially in places like New Mexico and West Texas, even some in Central Texas, and all the way over to Alabama. I think there were some in Oklahoma. Before I get into the plot of this, I'm going to just kind of touch on it, just the main key element I want to talk about in this without spoiling the story. I'm very fascinated with the cattle mutilation phenomenon, and here's why. Because it's one of the few things that's tangible about the supposed UFO phenomenon. So cattle mutilation, this was supposedly what first got me interested in this in the mid 90s, was that this appeared to be the tangible evidence of UFOs interacting with Earth. And that alone was fascinating to me, that here, unlike somebody that just sees a UFO pass by and then you have their word or their, grainy photograph to show for it, cattle mutilations purport to be this physical, real evidence of that aliens have come, experimented on the cows, and taken off. So I've studied the subject enough, and I think anyone who digs into this enough can confidently say this is not the work of predators. This is not the work of little woodland creatures doing things to each other out on pasture land in the mountains. This is not anything of the sort. So the big question comes down to, there's three prevailing theories that you'll typically run into, and that is, of course, the predominant theory, if most of you have heard about, is aliens. That aliens in spacecraft have come down to our planet and experiment on cows to learn more about us, or learn about pollution, or nuclear experiments and things like that, and use the cows as a way to test and track that. The other theory is that it could be occult groups, that these are satanic or witchcraft groups or whatever, that are ritually mutilating cattle or other animals. And again, this is the leftover evidence of it that's found out in the fields. The third theory is one of biological and chemical warfare and just exotic weapon experiments. Since cattle typically move in groups, there's a lot that could be taken from that, as far as if you're designing weapons to deal with crowds of people, one way to test those would be on cattle. So, and also there's some theories about if you wanted to put something into the food supply, cattle are a direct path to the food supply, either through milk or through the meat in the cow. So those are the three main theories. Now this book really goes at it from, again, this is fiction. This is a novel of telling the story of not abductions, but mutilations happening in the small town. And this I found particularly interesting because whoever wrote this, this Mervin Casey dude, did his homework. It's actually a pretty good story, pretty fast read. But the interesting thing, and I'm surprised I haven't dog-eared this in here, is he talks about and I'm going to spoil a little bit of the story, so spoiler alert, stop it now if you want to read this and not have any of this spoiled for you. But in his fictional telling, the antagonists here, the mutilators, are actually these are actually military units that are mutilating cattle as part of a religious rite they're doing, as part of this kind of occult resurgence that's happening within the military, that they're worshiping old pagan gods as part of their military culture to make them better warriors and that sort of thing. And I found that really interesting. And he mentions, I think it's Mithras or something like that, but it goes back to the Roman era. And I found that a very interesting angle for this because he doesn't go the route of, oh, it's aliens or whatever like that. So personally, I find the cattle mutilation phenomenon to be very fascinating in that once I kind of got past the alien curtain, you start to see that the alien angle is what you're supposed to think. And again, this is my rampant speculation here, but in my studying, you're kind of corralled into the aliens did it theory and really steered away from the occult or paramilitary angle. And you'll find the authors who have really done significant research on paramilitary or chemical warfare angle, anything like that. Some of those guys meet with very violent ends, or just disappear altogether, or just leave the field altogether and get away from it. So I find it interesting if you want to write a book about this and you want it published and you want it in Barnes and Noble or something, then your best bet is to write a story about aliens doing cattle mutilation. If you write about biological warfare testing, that's going to get you in trouble. But anyway, back to the Mutilators. Interesting story, interesting fiction story. I look for books like this because even in fiction like this, sometimes you can find little bits of information. Like again here, I thought that was an interesting angle of the like special ops guys basically getting into the occult, which many of you who follow Dave McGowan's work won't be surprised at all by that. But I found it interesting this particular author kind of wove that all together. So anyway, cattle mutilation I think is an important field of research that dovetails with a lot of other occult research and a lot of paramilitary research. And especially since those are the two angles that are really downplayed. And I think the implications for psychological warfare with cattle mutilations are huge. So, and I'll cover that some more. I've got a lot of cattle mutilation books, so I'll hopefully cover that in more detail later on. So anyway, The Mutilators by Mervin Casey from 1976.